Hello and welcome back to my world of stuff. Yes, I know, I'm a big wimp. I'm still up in my office rather than back in the cinema room. Still a bit wild and windy. It's the day after Storm Bert, November the 25th today. And I thought I would do a quick unboxing. Now this video is going to be allied to another video which probably won't be recorded for a couple of days. And I don't know when you're going to actually see this video because of the nature of this unboxing. I don't think it's quite right to put it online just yet, but it may be sooner rather than later. Anyway, I've had a delivery in the post today from Mr. Amazon. This is a series which I'm going to unbox and review. This was suggested a few weeks back, and I didn't have a copy of it. And I realised it was coming out on Blu-ray, special edition, courtesy of the BBC, and thought I would pick it up. So here it is. It's arrived today. I have, in fact, already opened it, but for dramatic effect, I put it back in the box. I'm going to open it up again now. And we are talking about a classic BBC series that I've never seen all the way through. From 1984, I believe. This is The Box of Delights. Classic, well-regarded, iconic, I suppose, seasonal children's drama. The 40th anniversary Blu-ray edition from the BBC, which has just come out. It's come out previously on VHS and on DVD. And as I've never seen it all the way through, I watched the first episode years ago and never appealed to me enough to go back to it. However, I've got a YouTube channel now and I do reviews and unboxings and I take requests. This was requested, so I thought I'd pick this up and take a look at it. And first of all, I'm going to unbox it for you. So if you're a fan of this series, it stars Devin Stanfield and the late great Patrick Troughton, based on the book by John Masefield, which I've never read. And it's a very nice edition. It's pretty much done by the people who do the Doctor Who and Blake 7 collection sets, in a sense. Comes with a very nice slipcover for those of you who care about such things, which has got a nice, yeah, it is very seasonal. It's very festive, very festive. And there's the back cover, which gives you a little précis of the series, which my thumb is over, and a little look at the special features. There's a major new special feature on here, and here's the actual set itself still in its cellophane wrapping. So, without further, or indeed any ado, I shall slash open the cellophane with a handy implement, take off the cellophane wrapping, and we'll have just have a quick look at this set. I mean, it's not exactly one of these Doctor Who type sets with multi-discs and booklets and so on. It's pretty much for a standard Blu-ray release, but there we are. Same cover as the slip cover, of course. Open it up. In fact, it is 2 discs. I didn't realise it was 2 discs. 2 discs with episodes 1 to 6 and special features on disc 2. And the art is sort of based on the cover design itself. As I say, I've seen the first episode. I've never seen the whole thing. One of the great works of modern fiction, apparently. Who knew? So we have the set over 2 discs. The episodes, I'm sure they look lovely on Blu-ray. I don't know the technicalities of how they've spruced this up. This was a series, I think it cost the BBC £1 million to make this 6-episode animated, largely animated children's series from 1984, based on the book, with a lot of early computer animation. And I remember seeing sort of scenes of sort of animated wolves and things, I think, in the first episode. I can't speak with any authority, but I know at the time when this came out, this was considered to be fairly revolutionary and quite a big budget for BBC to spend on a children's programme. And the main attraction for this, I think, in terms of special features, is a documentary called Time and Tide, Making the Box of Delights, which I believe has been directed and put together by Chris Chapman, who does some of the beautiful special features that we've had on the Doctor Who set, and indeed the recent Blake 7 box set. I'm not going to watch that first. Normally I watch the special features first, but I don't think it's going to mean much to me without seeing the series. So I'm going to watch the series over the next couple of nights. Also includes Trails in Continuity, that's new to this set, 2004 Kay Harker and director interview, and some Blue Peter Take 2 and Pebble Mill clips from the time the show was on. I think those were on the original DVD release, but I think it's that special documentary which is going to be the USP for this particular set. So I'm sort of looking forward to seeing it and watching it and seeing what the fuss about it is. One of those things that a lot of people have said they go back to over the festive period. So it'll be interesting to see if I can get this, because I've had problems in the past watching things with a reputation from decades ago that I don't have a connection to. I think most recently was The Goonies that left me cold. So I'll be watching this very, very soon, and then I will update this video with a review and a rating. So don't go away. I'll be back
now.
Hello, welcome back. Right, it's a few days later. Oh, my clothes have all changed. How strange. It's now December the 9th, and I finally finished Box of Delights. Here are my thoughts. Yes, so here we are, a few days later, and I finally made my way through Box of Delights. It wasn't particularly onerous, but it's just been a busy few days. I haven't had a chance to sort of sit and collect my thoughts. We've had various storms raging across the country and not been able to get into the cinema room where I do my usual recordings. But I finally finished Box of Delights, and I'm not here to trash people's memories. I'm not here to trash people's sacred TV programs or films or books. I'm just here to give my honest opinion of them in the 21st century. And I have to say, I didn't really get on with Box of Delights. Now, I understand that it's this hugely treasured piece of cult television for a lot of people. And a lot of people revisit it at Christmas and they get a lot of comfort from it. And they get a lot of nostalgia from it. And I think that's the key. As I've often said, the key to enjoyment of classic TV, classic films, retro films and TV, my hair's a bit out of control, is that you have to have been there at the time. And I think I experienced this with The Goonies, which I reviewed a couple of weeks ago. It meant nothing to me now. I didn't see it in the 90s. I didn't have that connection with that particular style of cinema, that style of storytelling. And I feel the same is true with Box of Delights. I think Box of Delights, you had to have been there in 1984 to really get it. And you had to have been taken in by its magic. And I can see the magic of it. I can see the atmosphere of it. It is festive. It has a very Christmassy feel to it. And I can understand why people who sat down and watched it then, particularly children who sat down and watched it then, will have brought it with them throughout their adulthood and will feel it is something that they can watch again and again and again. And I understand it has fan clubs and it has its admirers and people who really, really love it because they were there at the time and they fell into its embrace. I didn't see it at the time, which is a bit odd because even back in 1984, I was still watching sort of cult TV, classic TV. You would have thought I would have seen this. I mean, I was in work by then, but it's something which I would have expected to have watched. And I do have a vague memory of perhaps watching the first episode, and I've watched the first episode since, but as I mentioned, I've never got further than the first episode. I have now, I've seen the whole thing, and I have to say it doesn't work for me. Now, before I explain why that is, and I hope it doesn't get too many people too riled up, I have to say that my appreciation of the series has been much improved by watching the excellent 110-minute documentary, the making of documentary, on disc 2 of this new Blu-ray release. This is produced and directed by Chris Chapman. He does a lot of work for the Doctor Who and Blake 7 Blu-rays, which have been coming up with interesting documentary special features. He always finds a slightly different slant on his subject matter, and I think that watching that documentary last night when I finished the series made me think, well, actually, yeah, I can see the appeal of the series. It might not appeal to me particularly, but watching the documentary, it's nearly 2 hours, as I say, and he reunites Rennie Rye, who directed the series, with Devin Stanfield, who played Kay Harker in the series, who's now in his 50s. He's sort of slightly embarrassed by it because he made it as a 12-year-old, and it's something he's had a love-hate relationship over the years. But he reunites Rennie the director and Devin the star, takes them back to the locations where the series was filmed, and of course because of the nature of the series those locations haven't changed a great deal, and throughout the documentary intersperses it with interview snippets from other cast members, the effects people, the designers, the musicians. He sort of gets comments from everybody, and I think that whole thing makes me step back a little bit and say, well, I can actually appreciate what they were doing with this series. And I can appreciate what an enormous undertaking it was, because this was a 6-part series based on the John Masefield classic children's book, which I think is held in similar sort of esteem as the Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. It seems to have that place in people's affections as a classic piece of children's literature. And again, not read it, so it doesn't have that place in my affections. But they were trying to make this ambitious 6-part series on £1 million budget. That sounds like a lot of money, and it was a lot of money in 1984, especially for a children's series. The BBC had never spent that sort of money on kids' TV before. And it needed that sort of money. You watch it now, And there are some impressive sort of setups in terms of what they were doing practically with location filming and setups and props and things on location. Where the series fell down for me in watching it is the visuals. At the time it was groundbreaking, computer sort of animated visuals and extraordinary green screen effects. I'm watching it now, of course, it's 40 years old. There are no new updated effects on this new Blu-ray release. It's presented as it was made, and I think that's probably how its admirers would want to see it. Watching it now for the first time, it seems very creaky, and it seems very hokey, it seems very twee, and the effects, we've moved on so far since then in terms of video effects, animated effects, CGI. This looks very primitive. The reason for that is that it is very primitive. It's the early days of this sort of stuff. And the BBC are to be commended for pushing at the frontiers of what the BBC could do visually. And put things on screen which nobody had seen before on TV. Now it looks terribly primitive. It looks terribly old-fashioned. And I have to say, terribly unconvincing a lot of the time. But in 1984, a lot of kids had probably never seen anything quite like this. And I can understand how it caught people in its trap and how it means so much to people. The story of Box of Delights, as I'm sure many of you may know, set in Christmas 1934, and it's the story of young Kay Harker, played by Devin Stanfield, fresh-faced, enthusiastic performer, shall we say. He's on the train home for the Christmas halls, and he meets up with the mysterious Punch and Judy man, Cole Hawlins, played by the legendary Patrick Troughton, and it's always great to see Patrick Troughton in anything. This was towards the end of his career, in fact, he passed away a couple of years later. He entrusts Kay with a magical box, a box of delights, a box which has powers to shrink you, to sort of Borrower-style tiny person. It can send you flying at high speed through the air, and it can send you back in time. This device is coveted by the evil Abner Brown, this character played by huge relish with big theatrical actor Robert Stevens, whose career was in a sort of bit of a dip at the time. But this is a role that he seized with relish, and his performance is fantastic. He really knocks it out of the park. It's a big, fruity, full-blooded, malevolent character who doesn't seem particularly evil, but he wants this box of delights. He wants what it can do, and he'll stop at nothing to get it. Basically, that's what the story is. It's Abner Brown who wants the box that Kay has got, and it's various toings and froings, with Kay using the box to escape from Abner. His friends coming in and out of the adventures. Cole is kidnapped. Lots of characters are kidnapped by Abner and his associates. And it's all wrapped up in a lot of snow and a lot of creatures and animation. And as I say, watching it for the first time, I was a bit disappointed that it didn't draw me in. Very often when I watch something that I haven't seen, that is archive or retro, I can sort of very often zone in on that and think, yeah, I get this. And I do get how this appealed to people at the time. But I was disappointed that it didn't feel magical to me. It didn't work for me. I didn't find the story hugely compelling because it is basically a runaround. And I did find it very, as I say, very twee and very hooray, because it's set in 1937 and I appreciate it has to reflect the way the world was then. And it's hard to imagine, even in 1984, that, you know, kids who were starting to get quite hip with new romantic music and the post-punk world and all that sort of stuff, that kids would sit down and watch these jolly hockey stick kids running around talking about things being splendiferous and hooray. It's all very mumsy and it's all very cutesy. And 40 years after the event, and years again after it's set, it grated on me a little bit, and I found it hard to really get into it. And I didn't find the story particularly compelling. But as I said, what made it work for me in the end was watching that documentary about how they made it and the difficulties they had. Even on £1 million budget, they had all sorts of problems with the weather when they were filming in Scotland. And this is the thing that travelled up and down the country, really filming. And some of the amusing anecdotes about the lack of health and safety when they were filming certain scenes that would never be done today with child actors wading through ice-cold water in underground catacombs, thrashing their way through huge snowdrifts. The BBC just wanted this thing made. Rennie Ryan, enthusiastic young director, wanting to make his mark. And I think he brought it to the screen as well as he could with the technology that was available at the time and the tools that were available to him at the time. But what disappoints me is that the story didn't engage me particularly. And it wasn't exactly a struggle to get through it, but I wasn't looking forward to watching it. I watched the first 2 episodes, then went back and watched another one, and I sort of blitzed the last 2 episodes. I can understand how this is an emotional experience for people, and I have that sort of thing too. And I think back to series I watched in the 60s and 70s. They throw me back to being a child watching Thunderbirds or Batman or 1960s Doctor Who, any of those things. Watch them, and they still have that magic, and they still have the ability to catapult you back in time to when you were young and your whole life was ahead of you and you didn't have to worry about work and mortgages and money. And I understand that Box of Delights almost certainly does that for a generation who watched it in 1984. I think it's inevitable that visually it's going to look creaky. Can't help but look creaky, because the effects that were revolutionary at the time aren't now. There's these vague bits of animation of a phoenix coming out of the flames and other bird type creatures and transformations into animals. It is very primitive. But at the time, I suppose it wasn't. It was something new and different for television. And I think it shows you how things have bounded forward in 40 years in terms of what kids like, what adults watch, what audiences expect. Watching it now, for the first time properly, I couldn't help but wince at the creaky CSO effects, the equivalent of green screen, colour separation overlay, which was a BBC mainstay throughout the 70s and 80s, with the fringing around the characters, particularly in scenes where Kay is supposed to be shrunk and he's wandering around casting no shadow, and he's very obviously overlaid over this large setting. And there's a scene which I suppose is an exciting cliffhanger in episode 3, where the kids are all shrunk onto this toy yacht and they cling into this toy yacht which floats over a weir and they're in peril. But it's very obviously a model yacht with model figures stuck to it. The kids are all going, hooray, what an adventure. And it just seems very jolly hockey sticks. But having said that, it's great to see Patrick Troughton, always great to see Patrick Troughton. I think the child actors, they're not as slappable as some kids of their ilk are. And it's interesting watching the documentary how Devin Stanfield, who played Kay, didn't really want to be an actor. His mother sort of encouraged him, and he found himself on the books of a theatrical agency that was looking for photogenic young kids. And he found himself on TV on the Chalky TV series in the 80s, and then this. But he didn't really take to acting. He now works behind the scenes in production design on quite big budget, shiny floor shows on TV. And it's interesting watching him talking about it with some reluctance and a bit of embarrassment. But I think he looks back, as most of us do, perhaps at our 12-year-old selves, and think, oh God, did we look like that? But I think his performance is exuberant, shall we say. And all the kids, they have that sort of stage school goshness about them. The enthusiasm when they're playing these parts that are sort of distanced from what we appreciate as kids and culture today. And I think that's the sticking point, really. And I think at the end of the day, the story is pretty simplistic. It is an escape capture sort of thing. There's a lot of imagination in it, and I think there's lots of elements of things like pitting the ideas of paganism against Christianity, and you've got scenes travelling back in time. And I'm glad again that I watched that documentary, because there was a scene where Kay goes back to Roman times, and that is done with a sort of bizarre sense of unreality to it. And Rennie Wright particularly wanted that, because it's very much a CSO backdrop. The sea is a sort of a CSO fringed thing. It doesn't look convincing, but that's what he wanted. He wanted to bring across the idea of somebody doing something impossible and fantastical and making it look more fantastical, not making it look realistic. Watching it on TV, I was like, oh God, that looks terrible. But I see why he made that creative decision and why he did certain things the way he did. So ultimately, I think that it's an interesting piece of television. And I'm not going to trash it. I'm not going to slag it off. I'm not going to say, oh God, it was terrible. Because although it didn't work for me, I know a lot of you people out there, and I know a lot of you out there, cherish it and watch it as a ritual at Christmas. And I think that's fantastic. I think it's fantastic that it has had that tale, that afterlife. But I think my problem, obviously, coming to it 40 years later, all I'm looking at is, oh God, this looks so cheap. And it isn't cheap, because it was a big budget at the time. But it is interesting that it's not been remade, and I would be quite interested to see a remake with modern technology. And I'm not necessarily advocating CGI all over the screen and all that sort of stuff that we take for granted. But I think that an interesting version could be made of the story, using effects sympathetically to the story that make it look more convincing than this, unfortunately. So I know it sounds as if I'm taking a hatchet to this. I'm really not, because I don't like doing that on this channel. If I don't like something, I like to try and explain why. And if I do like something, I like to explain why. Two things that I will, however, merrily, in the spirit of Christmas, give a thumbs up to is the music and the title sequence. Title sequence is hugely evocative, this sort of flurry of snow and then images of characters from the series, that the Punch and Judy Punch figure comes swirling towards you and spins away. Then we see some of the animal creatures. We see Patrick Troughton, a big close-up on Patrick Troughton's face. It's very 80s, but it works very effectively, along with the music by Roger Limb. The music, the theme, is based on the First Noel, which is from the Carol Symphony Andante Quasi Lento e Cantabile. Yeah, I didn't know I could speak Welsh. I do my research. But no, this is very effective. It is very, this is evocative of Christmas, and this is what makes the whole thing such a Christmas classic, I suppose. And the music itself, it's interesting because the music, the theme, bleeds into radiophonic music by Roger Limb. And for a serial set in the 1930s with magical sort of fantasy elements to it, a radiophonic theme might seem like a strange idea. You might have expected something a bit more orchestral and a bit more classical. But the use of radiophonics actually works quite well. The music, as I say, is by Roger Limb, who did a lot of radiophonic music for Doctor Who at the time. And he was one of the less memorable of the providers of radiophonic music for the show, because his themes were quite dull and quite repetitive and sort of wah, sort of repeated motifs. But in 1984, he provided the doomy gloomy score for Peter Davison's final Doctor Who series, The Caves of Androzani, which had a slightly darker, more funereal atmosphere to it, which was appropriate because it was a story building up to a Doctor's regeneration. And he carries that on here, and the music, especially the title sequence, which has the First Noel from Carol, as its introduction, it then morphs into this quite eerie and somber radiophonic backdrop, which actually works quite well in context of the series in the end, and it's sort of filtered through the whole series. So even though it's very 1980s electronica, it fits in quite well with the 1930s setting and the slightly eerie, edgy feeling of the whole series. Box of Delights in 2024 didn't work for me, unfortunately, but I had an interesting time watching it, and the documentary, which I watched afterwards, as I say, really gave me a slightly heightened appreciation of it. And I could see how hard everybody was working and how much everybody wanted this to work. And it's not their fault that 40 years later it doesn't stand the test of time for me. However, I know that for a lot of you it will. A lot of you will watch it now and feel the same way about it that you did then, and that is absolutely great. I'm not going to rate Box of Delight because that wouldn't be fair. But I'm going to say that I'm glad I've watched it. And if you are a fan, as I say, this new Blu-ray is out. It looks very nice. I don't know if they've upscaled it or remastered it. They've obviously done some work to it. But it looks very nice. It's a good, clean image. The sound is good. And it is worth picking up if you're a fan for that nearly 2-hour documentary, which certainly made me feel a bit warmer towards it than I did when I finished the 6th episode. So that's Box of Delights, which is out now. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope it hasn't angered you, because I didn't like Box of Delights very much. But if you are new here and if you like retro TV, and if you like retro films, stick around, because there's loads of stuff coming up, especially over the Christmas period. I will be uploading a lot of content then. Like and subscribe. Check back through the channel. There's loads of stuff that you might be interested in seeing. So stick around. I will see you soon. Until I do, keep taking the stuff.